We have Luke Weinhagen, one of the fellows here at the National Law Institute, author of the Primal Primer, which there are copies in the back. If you don't have a copy, I would highly recommend the book. It's great. I love it. Also, the founder of Core Human Competency. So, a wonderful man and a great speaker. So, welcome, Luke Weinhagen.
Thank you. All right, today we're going to talk about the question of war. It's a term that gets used all the time. We use it all the time, right? We try to define it in a lot of different ways. Our enemies use it all the time. All right, today we're going to have a discussion about what it actually means. Before we get into that, so I'm more of a coach and more of a trainer than I am a lecturer. That means you guys get to participate. All right, I want you involved in this discussion today. We're going to start by you're going to have to take out a phone or a notepad or something like that. You guys got to get involved here. And I need you to write down the 3 most important things in your life right now. All right, when you do this, and even if you don't need this exercise, I recommend you do it so that you can use this later with others, right? But when you do this, be specific. So for example, on my list, my number 1 thing is my wife, but I don't write down wife on the list. I write down Malia. I write down her name. I see her face when I write it down. My number 2 is my children, but I don't write the word children. I write down my kids' names. And I can see each of their faces as I do this. You know, maybe your number 3 is your pet. Maybe it's a project you're working on. Maybe it's your job or your career. But when you do that, who is your favorite employee? Who is your favorite teammate? Who is your favorite client to work with? Right? Really draw up a personal image for this exercise. All right? That's what you need to make this powerful. And that's what we're going to do today. Okay? So I'll give you a couple minutes, make your list, and then as soon as I see your attention back up here, we'll move on. It's okay if it's more than 3. I just need you to have at least 3 on there. Everybody's using this time to check their Twitter accounts and stuff. All right, you guys keep working on that. I'm going to move forward. Just listen as you do this. Yes. All right, defining the conflict. So as I said in the beginning, we use war all the time. We use it for everything, right? It's always about capital, right? So in this context, we're using the word capital as assets that produce value or provide benefits to those with demonstrated interest, right? The owners of the property, right? That's how we're using the term capital in here. I'm not talking about the state capital or the nation's capital or anything like that. It's the capital is the assets that are valuable to the people, all right? Got just a real condensed definition there. Below that, in short, war is groups engaged in conflict over the destruction and or control of property, right? We kind of recognize that that's just a real simplified version of describing war. Now, all of our narratives, I said, you know, we all use the term war in a lot of different ways. All of our narratives tell us that the important word there is conflict, right? I'm going to argue today that the important word there is engaged, not conflict. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So, what are the forms of capital that could be under attack? What are the forms of capital that could be being attempted to be destroyed or be controlled? Throw some out at me. What do you guys got? What do you think that our enemies could be attacking? Lives, exactly. It's a perfect example. Great. Anything else? Just throw them out. What's that? Businesses. How would an enemy attack a business? What would they be trying to do? Just take you out of business? There you go. It's a good one. Anything else? Psyches. Describe that a little more. What do you think?
Filling our minds with negative.
Right, they're undermining you. They want you discouraged. They want you, they want you in a rut. They want you stuck and inactive and incapable, right? They want you dependent, right? They're attacking us in all kinds of ways. All of those represent some of the capitals that we're talking about. I put together a list of some of the types of properties, some of the types of assets that provide us value that are frequently under attack. Some of these you might not think of. You know, we think of war, often we think of they're blowing our buildings up, right? They're killing us, right? They're destroying our resources, things like that. All of these, and this is not exhaustive, this is just a short list to demonstrate some examples of all the different types of property, all the different types of capital that come under attack in warfare, all right? Attacks can be launched against all of these things. All of these things can be destroyed by an enemy, right? So they're all vulnerable to attack by an enemy, right? So these are all candidates for that's description that describes or defines war. You guys see that? Okay. So now, I'm going to make a little contrast here. I'm going to compare and contrast war versus conquest. Right, I have a very similar definition up here on what it means for conquest. Right, and in short, conquest is the conflict over the destruction and or control of property where the targeted property is inadequately defended. That's the distinction between conquest and war that I'm making for you here. Okay? All right, so what's the difference then? They sound a lot alike, right? They're both conflicts over property where the intent is the destruction of the property and or the control of access to the property or who gets the benefits of the property, things like that, right? They both have those components. Those are elements of both of them. So what's the difference? I'm going to use a couple of videos here, and we don't have sound, right? I don't want sound, so if we have it, turn it off. That'll just distract. I'm going to use a couple of videos here just to kind of help you understand the concept that I'm working with you guys today. So watch this and tell me when it becomes a fight. There's a lot of scholars. Yeah, they're deciding who gets the scholarship. So is it a fight right now?
No.
Is it a fight? Is it a fight though? Does the kid that just got hit, does he have any means of responding to this? Is this a fight? It's not a fight, it's an assault, it's a beatdown, but it is not a fight. Right? Can you guys see the distinction there? Let's do another one. Let's see if we can help make it clear. There's an attack. Weapons are used. Is this a fight?
No fight.
Why not? There's an attack, there's weapons used. Why isn't it a fight?
No fighting back. There's
no engagement. She has absolutely no means of defending herself in this situation. Right? She is not, this is not a fight. She is not in that fight. All right, this next one's a little bit longer, but I just really want to drive this home. You can stop that. It doesn't get better.
It's a lot worse.
Right. So is this a fight? It's terrible camera work, but is it a fight? Right. There's been an attack.
We're waiting to see if he responds.
See, there's another attack. Is it a fight yet, though?
No.
There's multiple attacks going on between multiple parties.
This might turn. Okay.
Now we're making decisions here.
Yep. Now we got.
There we go. All right, now we can stop it. This is what we're looking for. This is what we're chasing today. Right. But do you see how all of these things, they all have the same characteristics except for one. And that's whether or not the receiver of the attack engages in the conflict. Right? That makes the difference between it being an assault, it being an attack, and it being a fight. That same condition, I'm telling you today, exists in the distinction between war and conquest. Right? And that's what we're going to play with today. So how do we start recognizing that? How do we start to see, how can we fight a fight when we don't even know that it is a fight, when we can't tell what a fight looks like? How can we fight a war when we don't know what that looks like? Right? So one of the things I do, not in this room, but one of the things I do is I'm also a self-defense instructor, but I spend almost all of my time working with people that have little to no direct experience with violence. All right, so I'm starting from nothing with my clients. Right, and my book does the same thing for a lot of other domains, but for the self-defense stuff, that's where I begin. So I have to teach people, what does violence even look like before we can talk about how do you survive that violence, right? The way I do that, one of the mechanisms or the techniques I use to do that is I slow the attack down. We'll watch an attack, we'll demonstrate an attack, then we slow the attack way down so that they can see the mechanics that exist in that sequence of the attack. Right, so if I'm standing up in front of you today and I go like this, you guys know what's happening next, right? Because all you're at least somewhat familiar with the mechanics of violence, right? Now, this comes from the fact that we are pattern hunters, right? We look for patterns everywhere. Our whole life, we're just looking around for patterns. We're taking patterns in. All of our signaling is pattern recognition, right? We are pattern hunters. Because we are pattern hunters, we can learn to see the past. Because we are pattern hunters, we can learn to see the future. And that's how we start to learn how to respond to these fights, right? So let's dial my sucker punch back a little bit, another step further, right? So I cock my hand back. You know that what's coming next is a punch, right? But what has to happen before that? What's going to happen before that if I'm going to throw that punch?
Close the distance.
I'm going to, well, let's say the distance is already closed. We're in the engagement range, right? But I'm going to take that step back. Every time you watch a punch thrown, you're going to see, obviously there's going to be exceptions, but every time you watch a punch thrown, you're going to see these mechanics, right? So I take a step back, then I cock the fist, right? So now we've just demonstrated, we just taught you 2 steps of mechanics leading up to the attack, right? The punch itself is not the attack. The attack is a sequence of steps leading to the attack. Now in that same situation, I could be standing there in front of you and I ball my fists. Then I take the step back. Then I cock the arm, right? Those are all steps we can learn to recognize in the sequence of the violent attack, right? So we can see backwards. You know, if you got hit in the face, you know you can walk backwards and know those steps occurred. If you see somebody take any of those steps, you know what's coming. You can see the future. You know, as soon as you, in that environment, under those conditions, if somebody balls their fist, you're getting hit, right? But then you get to start to decide when in that sequence you respond. You don't have to wait for the punch to land for you to respond, right? Let's take another example. A giant entertainment company bought a multi-generational, culturally impactful franchise that allowed a lot of us in our childhoods to participate, at least as observers, in the hero's journey. Now, they turned that franchise into magic lesbian firefighters in space, right? Right? Now, a lot of us looking at that are going to see that thing that just came out as the attack. That's not the attack. That is just where the punch landed that knocked your nostalgic childhood unconscious, right? But that's not the attack. The attack is a whole sequence of actions that took place leading up to that final connection of the hit, right? So what did they do? So let's wind that one back. They had to start retelling stories and discordantly casting the main characters of those stories. That was another step in the sequence of that attack. Dial it back even further. They had to start hiring people that prioritized equity and diversity and inclusivity over good storytelling. That was another step in that sequence of attack, right? Dial it back even further. They had to start putting sensitivity warnings on all of their own material to signal to you that they're aware of how bad they were then, so they're really good now, right? So if you can start to recognize those as a sequence of mechanics leading up to the entire mechanism of attack, we can start responding to those attacks earlier and earlier and earlier. We can start engaging in that conflict when we see those early signs. Right? They put up the warning on their material. You stop supporting them then instead of waiting for them to light fires in space. Right? So that's what we're doing here today with me. But I want you to, as you're listening to these talks that people are giving today and the ones that have already occurred, and as you watch these again in the future with the videos, watch them with that frame. Don't look at these as intellectual activities. They are not. We are far past time where we have that option. These are not intellectual activities. These are situation reports and training exercises teaching you how to recognize these fights. Each presenter here is slowing down an attack and walking you through the steps, the mechanics of that attack, so you can start to see what that attack looks like. So you get to decide when in that process of attack you start responding. That's what we're doing here today. That's your responsibility to start looking for those things in the talks that we're having today. And that's where I pull in this notion, this idea of civilizational self-defense. We're using the same techniques we use for personal, physical self-defense and applying it to how we start defending our civilization against these attacks. It's the same process. We learn to read the past so that we can predict the future, right? That gives us time, that buys us time to get engaged in the conflict earlier and earlier and earlier, before damage is done, right? Before we're compromised to the point where we can't respond anymore. Before we're jumped by the group of scholars, right? We don't want to be there. Nobody wants to be there, right? So what does this look like? We slow down the mechanism of attack. You guys get how that works? You see how that process works? Our talks today are slowing down those mechanisms of attack. We're trying to give you guys a glimpse of the steps that take place in order for that attack to land, right? We want you to see the future on these things. we take the time and we go over in as much detail as required to recognize the mechanics of each attack, right? Our talks go long. We are trying to get you to recognize the mechanics of each attack. We observe the conditions within which the attack occurs, right? If I'm in this room of people and somebody balls their fist, it's much less likely to produce an attack than if I'm in a crowded bar full of morons that are pissed, The conditions, we have to pay attention to those conditions because they influence what future is coming, right? Then we identify from where the attack originates, right? If I see somebody ball his fist, I'm not thinking the attack's coming from the ladies' room. I think it's coming from the guy in front of me, right? We just got to pay attention to where the attack is coming from or we have no chance, right? And then we address the vulnerability exploited by the attack. Why are we being attacked? Why do they feel comfortable attacking us? Yeah. Why are we targeted by the attack, right? A lot of our efforts, a lot of our talks about these attacks, these interactions with enemies is about them. It's about they and them, right? I'm trying to shift that for you to it being about you and us, right? I need you taking responsibility for your role in civilizational self-defense and stop waiting for the bad guy to stop being the bad guy. He's not gonna.
There's no incentive.
He's not gonna stop being the bad guy. So we expect warfare to look and feel like this. We see images like this. If we were living amongst scenes like this, we would feel ourselves in that war footing. We would feel war all around us all day, every day. Everything we did would be part of that warfare, right? We would be engaged in a war effort. We'd be rationing. We'd be, Dad would have to go shoot bullets, so Mom would have to go to the factory to make bullets. Right? Our kids would be practicing, what do you do if the bombs come in their schools, right? All of our daily lives would be impacted by this condition of war. If we recognized that war looked like this, if we saw the conflict like this, right? So what happens when the conflict looks like this? We don't feel those things.
Unfortunately, we lose because we walked away.
Right, well, we're getting there. We're getting there. Now, I'd argue that we lose because we walk away too late. We don't get engaged. We don't see the attacks, right? So when warfare looks like this, we don't put ourselves on that war footing, right? We aren't engaged. We aren't rationing. What's rationing? It's just foregoing your preference. How many of you are sacrificing because we're at war? In a conflict like this, in warfare like this, in the war effort like this, Dad might get canceled and lose his job, so Mom has to go to work. It's the same dynamic. Dad's being on the battle line, Mom has to step into the factory. It's the same dynamic. In warfare like this, instead of your kids playing duck and cover at school, the school is the enemy. So why are your kids there? Duck and cover from school, right? I mean, we're not in that war footing right now. We're not doing those things. We're not engaged in the conflict. Here's another term that we like to use all the time. Our enemies use it, we use it, and I want to make another distinction here, right? We understand institutional capture. We've got logos from major corporations all over the world demonstrating what we've been calling institutional capture. We've got buildings significant to us in states across the country, in our nation itself, demonstrating what we've been calling institutional capture. We've got people we've paid and trained to defend us, demonstrating what we've been calling institutional capture. Right? Seems pretty clear, right? So, next distinction, are they captured or are they conquered? So, captured means that the capital remains populated by hostile actors and systems. You may have control of the territory, but it's not your territory.
They're conquered.
Right? Captured capital is controlled by the attacker, but has not been turned into productive benefit by the attacker, by the enemy. Right? Captured capital requires resources to be expended to continue to retain control, right? So that's how I'm using the word captured here, and how I hope you guys start thinking about it. Conquered, instead, is capital is populated by compliant actors and systems. Conquered capital serves the enemy's interests and effectively becomes enemy property. Conquered capital institutionalizes the control by the enemy as inherent to the capital. So when we're thinking about captured institutions, we need to start looking at it with a little more detail. A lot of our institutions are not captured. A lot of our institutions are conquered. So education, is it captured or conquered?
Conquered.
I'd argue at least the government form of education is conquered. It is not populated by hostile actors or systems. Right? It has been turned to our enemy's benefit. And education, as far as government education, is a conquered system, is a conquered institution. Entertainment, captured or conquered?
Conquered.
Yeah, absolutely. there's a few hangers on. Right? There's some guys putting up a good fight, but right now it's conquered. Law, is law captured or conquered? Good. You guys are seeing the distinction. Yeah, there's still a lot of hostility towards the conquest in those systems, right? It's in the process of being conquered, absolutely, but right now it's in the state of being captured, right? Lawfare is being used against us, it's being weaponized against us and our allies, things like that. So we can recognize that there is capture of that capital, but it is not yet conquered, right? Our enemy has not been able to turn it to their benefit entirely, right? You guys see the distinction there?
Yes. That's right.
How about culture? Is culture captured or conquered? Shout them up. Give me the answers.
I would,
It's okay to be wrong. That's what we're learning.
I would say captured.
And I would say it depends on how you define culture. Who do you call you and yours?
I'd say no. I consider their culture enemy.
Right. Yeah, and that's good. As long as you have a distinction between their culture and your culture. Right. As long as you can affect that distinction.
I would say conquered because they are liquidating our culture and using it against us.
Right. And yeah, and it's going to, for different areas and different populations, it's going to be a different answer. Right? In some places, like I live right in the middle of the bluest of blue cities. The culture there is conquered. Right? For some of you, that's not going to be the case, but I need you to start seeing the distinction, and that's what's important here. Right? So here is the sequence that I'm talking about. An enemy initiates an attack. They go after what they expect to be a vulnerability. That is an act of war, that is warfare, and in that state right now, if we respond to it, it is war. If we fail to respond to it, or our response is inadequate, that property, that capital, becomes captured. That's the state it is in. If then we fail to respond to it, or our response is inadequate, that property becomes conquered. Right? So this is what I'm talking about when I say there's a distinction between being at war and being conquered. Right? And it's not about what your enemy's doing. It's about what you are doing or capable of doing. Right? We keep trying to make this about what our enemy's doing to us. It's not about that. It's about what we are willing to do to our enemy that defines what state of this we're in. All right? So stop making it their responsibility and start making it yours.
It's not their fault they're winning. It's our fault we're losing.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
our enemies are going to be enemies. Stop expecting them to behave like anything but. Right? All right, so conquest or was, just dig into this a little bit more. So we recognize we're under attack, and now we recognize the attack doesn't become a fight until we start to fight back. So what's stopping us from fighting back? Now that we can see it, now that we're a little bit better at seeing it, let's look at why we're not getting in that engagement state. Why aren't we at war? Is it awareness? Right? If you cannot see the conflict as conflict, you have no chance to engage the enemy in conflict. We're fixing that. We're solving that here today. Okay? Just keep practicing it, you're good. All right, competence. Like I said earlier, I work with a lot of people that have zero experience, direct experience with violence, right? So this is a big one for me. Competence. Many people simply do not know how to engage in the type of conflict that's being thrust upon us. They have no frame for it. They don't know how to recognize it. They have no frame for how to engage in it. They don't know. We're fixing that here. Not just here today, but I mean in all the work that NLI is doing. We're fixing the problem of competence. And a lot of the work you guys are doing, you're fixing the problem of competence, right? That's one of the big things that this group does really well. Support. Our current culture leaves everyone isolated and dependent. People feel like no one has their back, right? So cancellation, which is ostracism, is a real threat when you have no network of support, right? We can help facilitate that. Right now, we can't do that because it has to be built locally, right? A person that is halfway across the country can't show up and help you protect yourself before the attack lands, right? I mean, you guys get that, right? Somebody's throwing a punch at you and your guy's in the bathroom, he's not gonna be there to help intercept that attack, right? Physical proximity is required for effective response to a lot of these attacks, okay? Our networks are what wins us these conflicts, right? Morality. The enemy wants you convinced that compliance is the moral good, okay? And any resistance to compliance is antisocial, okay? Morality that demands the destruction of yourself or your people is not moral. Don't ever let them fool you, it is. Okay? So morality's foundation is that which you hold dear. Go back to your list. That is your morality. That is your foundation for morality. Those most important things to you. Anything that harms them, anything that damages them, anything that undermines them cannot be moral in your framework. Unless you're evil, and evil is what's the most important thing to you. Right? All right, so fear. When you're missing awareness, competence, support, and morality, fear is a rational state. It is appropriate to feel fear there. If you didn't feel fear there, you'd be one of the psychopaths and stuff we were talking about in the other presentations, right? Fear is healthy when you're lacking all of the tools you need to face conflict at a group level. Don't let fear be the thing that stops you. There's nothing wrong with you feeling fear, right? When you start building these elements, as you build the awareness, the competence, the support, and morality, like we're doing here at this conference and that we do in our efforts elsewhere, you become capable of navigating that fear. Instead of denying it, instead of trying to push it away, instead of make the fear not exist, don't ever do that. It's just a waste of time. You're losing your access to a very sensitive signal there. Learn to navigate it, and that's what we're doing here. Then we turn fear into an incentive, right? We turn that fear into anger. We turn that fear into indignation. We turn that fear into fuel to respond to the attacks. We use fear as the reason we engage rather than the reason we don't engage. Cost of being conquered. And here's where I want you to pull your list back out. I want you to take a look at your list. Now, some of my list things are up here. That's what I'm using as examples. But I go through your list, and each one of these, let's say it's your spouse. What happens if the bad guys win to your spouse, to your relationship with your spouse, to your spouse's way of life? What happens to those things if the bad guys win? What is the cost of their destruction of that capital? Right? Do the same thing for the next thing on your list. For me, it's my children, right? What happens to your children if the enemy's conquest succeeds? Right? They want total conquest. They don't want war. They don't want us to think we're at war, believe we're at war. They don't want us any near war. They want it just to be conquest. Right? So what happens if their conquest continues to go unopposed? I think it looks terrible for children if the enemies keep winning, right? I mean, that terrifies me. That's what motivates me to do stuff like this, right?
These specific enemies,
Right,
not good for children.
right.
That's the primary target, because most of them don't reproduce anyway.
Right, and I'd suggest that if they're destroying your valuable capital, then any enemy is harmful to your children, because then you're losing that intergenerational capital to pass on to your children, right? And then opportunity, right? What does your career look like if the enemy succeeds, if the enemy's conquest goes unopposed? And you need to do that for everything on your list. You need to make that calculation. What is the cost to this thing that's most important to me if the enemy wins? If I don't stop them from doing what they're doing, what is the cost to that thing? Not just myself, but to everything on that list, right?
And I'd just like to add to that,
Yep.
that there's a time preference as to how long people have to have families and marriages and children, and you only get so many years with your children. So some of those, we don't have a whole lot of time to get that all figured out.
Time's one of the resources our enemy loves taking from us. That's one of the resources they love to destroy. So absolutely. All right, so a choice without choice. If you truly value the things on your list that you claim are the most valuable things to you, this is a choice without a choice. Right? It's not a choice whether or not you're in this fight. It's not a choice whether or not you're getting engaged in the conflict. The conflict is here. The only choice here is who's benefiting from your actions. Is it you and yours, or is it theirs? Because someone's benefiting either way because the conflict is here. Right? We're not engaged. It's just not an option anymore. Right? So just like as in violent conflict on the street, the bad guy, the enemy, the opponent, they choose when the attack happens. They choose where the attack happens. They choose the level of aggression of the attack. They choose how long the attack lasts. The only choice you get to make is how you respond to that attack. And don't let it be a reaction. Reaction means that the attack already landed. It's how you respond to the attacks. That's why it's so important to learn to see these mechanics so you give yourself time to respond instead of react to these attacks. All right. Where do we end up? Right? So here's where we go back to. This is choice without choice. Do you pay the cost of the attack or do the enemy? Does your spouse pay the cost of the attack or does the enemy? Right? Like I said before, the attack just doesn't stop. They just don't go, oh, sorry, I'm going away now. Right? That's just not how they behave. That's not how an attack works. That's not how warfare works. Right? Do your children pay the costs? A lot of people are letting their kids pay the cost of the attack right now.
They sure are.
Yeah. Do you let the future pay the costs of your attack? Right? Are you sitting in a place of being comfortably conquered where you don't mind that the future pays the costs of that? Right? You're not at war then. You're comfortable being conquered. Or do you fight and you make your enemies pay the cost? I think most people in this room want to be in that last one. They want to be at that place where the last one. That's why we're learning the things we're learning, right? All right, so the conquest ends. So in the conquest of the conflict of our age, the enemies want you compliant and discouraged. They want their conquest to proceed unopposed. Every time we call our state of being conquered war, we're doing our enemies a service. Because we're telling our people that what you're doing right now, sitting doing nothing, means you're already engaged in the war. Your inaction is acceptable because you're part of this war. When we don't make this distinction. We say it's acceptable for you to not be engaged in this. We'll still say you're part of the war. Right? We're never going to get them from conquest back to captured if we're telling them they're already at war. We can't even have that conversation. We're not going to get them from captured to war if we're telling them they're already at war. Right? So the conquest ends when you replace your dependence upon the enemy and their systems and all the institutions they hold right now, all the institutions that they've conquered right now, replace that dependence with self-reliance. Sometimes that means going without things you'd rather not go without. Stop paying for your own conquest. Right? The conquest ends when social approval gets replaced on your list of most important things with something of actual value, like your family, your friends, the impact you're trying to have on the future. Don't let social approval supersede any of those values. Right? That's how your enemy wins. The conquest ends when you start to say no publicly, in your words, in your deeds, in your associations, and in your spending. Right? The type of warfare that's being engaged upon us, that's being thrust upon us, that we're being affected by, covers all of these domains. It's not just a physical fight. So you need to get in this mindset of, no, I will not participate, I will not comply. I will not keep funding your conquest of me and mine. I will not keep being a benefit to you in your conquest of me and mine. I'm going to do everything in my power to disrupt that conquest, to oppose that conquest. So the conquest ends. You don't need to be in every fight, right? When I was in the military, I believe it's still set up the same way. The Marine Corps was separated up into 3 different general fighting bodies, right? There was one on the east coast of the United States, one on the west coast of the United States, and then one in Japan and Asia, covering Asia, right? I wasn't ever part of all 3 at once. I was never part of all 3 of those fights at the same time, right? Nobody needs to be in all the fights all the time, everywhere. That's not how this type of conflict works. That's how you lose automatically, because you have no vigor to stay in that fight, to fight that fight, to be engaged in that conflict. So you need to find the actions that best protect your most important things, the things where you have the strongest motivation to keep you going in that conflict, to keep doing the rationing, to keep you on your war footing, to keep you engaged in that war effort, right? If you want to make this war instead of conquest. Right, so you need to pick, and these are just some examples. These are things that we're all trying to help you facilitate, right? Do more organizing, right? Build your communities like you guys are doing. That's an act of war. If you're on your war footing, that's an act of war. It's a positive act of war on behalf of your people, right? Do the training, do things like this. Learn how to see, how to slow down the attacks and start looking for the mechanics of the attack. Where does it originate? Where does the attack come from? Like we're doing this weekend, right? Start to look at all of these sessions, all the things all the podcasts you're listening to, all the videos you're watching online. Look at them from your war fighting stance instead of from just your entertainment stance or your curiosity stance. Use them as tools to slow down the enemy's attacks So you can see the sequence that leads to them landing their blows, right? Lawfare, doing a bunch on that, right? We're trying to get heavily involved in that, right? If you have a capacity for that, we need to get you involved there. Doing the boycotting, you see my not made in China symbol up here? I was doing some research and it hovers, it changes, but anywhere between 35% and 40% of the sellers on Amazon are Chinese. Now, that seems high, right? I've read estimates recently that as much as 80% of the products on Amazon are either directly or indirectly manufactured in China. And I don't have a problem with the Chinese people, but if you believe that China is engaged in warfare upon you and your people, why are you buying products from your attacker? I mean, it seems nuts to me, right? If you connect those two dots, stop connecting those two dots, right? If you think that's where the attack is coming from, stop paying for your own conquest. Networking, right? The network is a huge one, like we talked about earlier. Networks win conflicts, right? We have to build those networks. My goal, my dream, my hope, I want every single dollar I spend on anything to be in network. I want all you guys building businesses, I want all you guys building networks to the point where every single dollar I spend for any good, any service, anything is in network. Right. That's how I know my people are winning, right? We got to take steps to get there. If you don't know what to do with your life, find a gap, fill it, and let me give you my money. Mm-hmm. And activism, of course. We need to get you guys involved. We need you showing up. We need you willing to take the hits. We need you willing to stand up and say no publicly in that role of leader so your community can see you saying, I'm not going to allow this anymore. This attack stops or I'm going to turn it into war. Right? So that's the big thing. Like I said before, the bad guys, they're not going to stop. They're not going to just say, we were wrong. You guys are really nice. I don't want your stuff anymore. I'm going home. They're never going to do that. Right? But right now we're not fighting them. We're not stopping them. Right now we're captured and conquered. We keep saying we're at war, but we're captured or conquered. Right? So the conquest really ends when that changes and when you make it war. We're not going to change. We're not going to win it until then. Questions?
So for me, I live in a, relatively liberal place. I'm not sure how this is reflected in other areas of the country, but this is really helpful because like getting to be here and be with a bunch of people that think these things, but living in a place where no one even has these same presumptions, but are still required to interact with other people to be a functional, healthy human, and have to be building network where you are or whatever else. How do you recommend navigating that and balancing that, and where do you recommend searching to proceed into the future with that in mind?
You are in the right room. I recommend searching right here. You need to connect with these guys. We're all working on different projects. You can have effect with any one of those projects. You need to be connecting with groups of people, even if it's not this group, if you can find online groups like that. And then you may not, I'm not suggesting you get involved in all of those projects. You're gonna keep cycling through, keep making yourself available to those guys and those groups. We're gonna plug you into a project where you can make some effect, where you can have some impact, right? We may have you doing, research for lawfare. You can do that from anywhere, right? We can put you in front of a computer and you can sit there and do research as part of a lawfare, process. That's you engaging in this conflict. That's you effectively engaging in this conflict, right? There's stuff like that we can do for all of the mechanisms that exist, all of the ways of getting involved that are available, right? So we live at a fantastic time. You can get engaged in this conflict from anywhere. Now our enemies are using that to their advantage. We need to use that to our advantage, right? So yeah, don't be shy. Talk to us. Get in touch with us. We're all pretty approachable for the most part, most of the time, right? So yeah, just connect. We'll help you find the right place. So
the term that came to mind as you were talking was this term weaponized empathy.
Yeah.
And as you were talking about stepping on the back foot, I was thinking of, that's maybe weaponized empathy is one of those ways where they start leaning back.
Yep.
And I wonder if there's a way to catalog what do these, the telegraphing of what their next move is. Is there a way to like catalog all the ways that we weaponize empathy, for example, or some of these other strategies?
Yeah, there's ways of cataloging it. I'm much more concerned about you doing the practice to recognize it. I don't care if you ever know its name, as long as you know how to get out of the way of when the punch comes at you. That's much more important to me than you knowing what type of punch it was, right? You know, like the Disney case, right? As soon as they put a warning label on their own product, stop supporting, you know a punch is coming. Just like when the guy balls up his fist, you know you can see the future. You know what's coming, right? And we do enough of this, you do enough practice of this, you see these mechanisms of attack over and over again, you get better and better at recognizing what those initiations look like, what those first steps look like, what it looks like when your enemy switches into their war footing, and you can respond to that instead of waiting for that punch to land and going, well, shit, I guess I got to fight back now.
I just wanted to say on your point, you just got to look to their language and see that their language is violating some form of reciprocity, and you know it's coming.
Yeah, and don't limit yourself to any one pathway. We got to get better at identifying the mechanisms of our attack than our enemies are at launching the mechanisms of attack. Okay.
Hey, I really appreciate you mentioning the need for engagement in general, and was wondering if you might just expand upon that for a minute or two. Give us advice of what you think some effective forms of engagement are.
Well, and a lot of that's going to be, you know, I'm a big proponent of act locally, right? I think that has more impact than anything we do online, right? So a lot of that's going to depend on what the conflict looks like in your area. Have any of you already volunteered to be poll watchers at this next fake election?
You said it, it's fake.
Well, yeah, but just your being there puts pressure on our enemies. It doesn't matter what is actually happening there. Your presence there has a exactly.
Yes.
Right? And we all recognize stuff like that, but how many of us are volunteered to do that? And that happens, and there's a few, right?
Example, the anti-vote campaign on our own side, where they're saying voting doesn't matter.
Right.
It's the exact opposite. Every vote matters more than it ever has before. Sorry, is it muted still? Right. Every vote matters more than it ever has before, because for every vote cast, it makes it that much more dangerous, expensive, and scary for the lie to persist.
Right.
It is the application of pressure that they must continue to overcome that baits them into further extending their deception.
Right. When if you convince yourself today they're going to steal it, so there's nothing you can do, you don't get mad when they do it. And you need to be mad when they do it. Stop being okay with them conquering you.
Big part of the reason that the institutions were captured in the first place
Conquered.
is eventually conquered, but they captured then the conquered, as you said in your sequence, is because the people that could have held the institutions abandoned them to make more money in the private sector or somewhere else.
Yeah.
And if we want to fix it, we have to reverse that. We can't abandon. We may separate from institutions which are so far gone they're not worth saving.
Right.
But then we have to create something alternative.
And we have to stop using them. Abandon means abandon. It doesn't mean we get mad about it. It means we stop using those and letting them benefit our enemies. And you know, I mentioned in the talk that it's inadequately defended as one of the features, right? So it doesn't mean that nobody tried to stop it, right? We could have all tried really hard to stop it, and they still were effective at capturing that institution, the people leaving, right? That was another mechanism that institution became inadequately defended. So it shifted from war, where they were actively fighting back, to capture, where it's inadequately defended, to conquered, where where the hostility is either non-existent or is completely ineffective at that point, right? We got him first, and then I'll come back to you.
So another thing that I look at and I try to focus on is, in a lot of ways, we have been so apathetic for so long that we've inhibited our ability to really make any kind of real offensive. And so I look at it a lot as we need to also focus on fortification, building up our strength and increasing our power so that we can exercise more agency in the future.
Yeah, just don't build a wall when your enemy's already on the other side of it.
Right.
So that's my only pushback against fortification.
Right,
Look at that list. If that doesn't motivate you, then no amount of wall building's gonna. I mean, if my enemy's over here, I don't build a wall right here. I don't focus on any fortification. I got to get him out first. I have to switch from this territory being conquered to making it captured. Then I can start building walls and pushing them back out again. I have to get more hostile.
The Marxists went to Cornell University and told them they kept teaching that the professors kept teaching history this way, they would kill them. Right? So it wasn't a soft process that our institutions were captured and conquered. Our institutions were captured by the threat of violence. And we say that isn't the case. The Federates gave up in 1968 with only 3 weeks of protest against them. They always surrender quickly to the threat of violence, because that's what delegitimizes them as a government. So the soft version of that, which is what I got from listening to you, is I got to answer this guy's question, is that, and what Luke is saying is that you must confront them. So the question is just whether you're someone like me or Luke, which we are willing to confront everybody no matter what, and probably win. That if confrontation is difficult for you because you're in a vulnerable position, then you have to work with others to increase your numbers such that you can confront them. But what I think the problem, the very nature of the kind of people that are drawn to our organization, anything like it, is precisely because we think, we do not react. And I think that this is a primary issue for the intellectual side of the right, which I agree, that's what we are, right? Is that there's a tendency of the people on the intellectual side to think and to plan, but not to confront and not to threaten. Hold on, don't take my thunder yet. All right. So I have made, as everybody knows, I went all the way to threatening, which got me in kind of dangerous position, and I said, okay, I can't take down the rest of my people with that threat, so we boil it back. But as the Overton window moves, we have to escalate, right, to take advantage of it, and that escalation is now at least the point not of ignoring, not of doing something else, but of every single day confronting. Now, I will say something like, well, I'm not going to put up with that, or that's, well, you might, I'm going to respect your ability to do that, but that's immoral and unethical and evil in my respect. So you could just find some way to react on your terms, but you counter signal every single thing you run into every single day as an individual if you have the character to do it. If you feel too vulnerable, because if you do that in your environment, it might be different from, what are they going to do to me, a retired rich guy, I mean, if you go to your younger guy and you're in an environment where it's different, the end thing is figure out how to confront, accuse, and demand apology from those people. And if you can't do it on your own, join an organization like ours. It doesn't matter if it's your school board. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter who brought up voting. Did you bring up voting?
Yeah, well, yeah. And there's angry people everywhere, and they're all trying to take steps in this. So finding some group to go to war with right now is easy. Convincing them that they're not already at war, convincing them that they need to get on that war footing. Right.
So the same. So it's the same thing for the guys that preppers,
yeah.
Right? You're gonna be dead, right? The only thing you can do is when you're been conquered, is to fight.
Yeah. Or accept that you've been conquered. Stop saying you're in the fight.
I was going to mention, because I know Carroll Quigley's a big inspiration. He's on Curt's reading list, and Dr. Brad's pretty well read in him. But he talks about prior to a social institution becoming corrupt, it starts as a social instrument, which serves one of 6 social needs: military, political, cultural, religious.
Yep.
When it gets corrupt, you have a choice as a society. You have 3 options, which is circumvention, reformation, or revolt. So you could tear the institution down and restart. You can reform it internally, or you can circumvent and build your own.
Right.
And that's the choices, and we need to be examining our institutions along that consideration, I would say.
Well, and if our institutions keep representing a vulnerability to us that's not serving us, stop building them up again.
Yeah, circumvent them or reform them.
Yeah, well, not even reform. I'm saying some of them we can just do without.
Yeah.
We just keep doing them because we think they're necessary.
I just heard somebody volunteer to give a talk on Quigley.
Right.
Did you hear what I heard?
and these are all great points. The thing I really want you to take away from though is the practice of recognizing what the attack looks like. You need to develop that skill. All of the others, all of the defenses don't matter if they're happening after the attack's already done. You can't unexplode a bomb. Right? So stop waiting for it to go off before you get in there and prevent them from bombing you. Right? You got to learn what the attacks look like so you can get in that engagement earlier and earlier and earlier. That's not going to happen if you don't learn what the attacks look like. Right? And that's not going to happen if you think you're already doing it because you have no idea what the attacks look like.
I think one of the questions or definitions that need to be answered, I think especially people in my geographical area, is what the boundaries are of the fight. You know, if there's an enemy, what boundary is attempting to be protected, and that's a question I want to ask you, is in articulating that to people who feel the anxiety or feel the attack but don't understand how to draw a boundary.
If I can ask it, and if you don't want to share it, I'll just use myself as an example, but what's the number one thing on your list?
My wife.
If your wife is under attack, what are the boundaries for stopping that attack?
Well, yeah, that's the question. It's not the boundaries of stopping the attack or what boundaries I would put on myself, but what boundary is it that, and say I'm going to articulate the boundary that my wife might think to have about being attacked.
Okay, and that's great. It is subjective, but that's why I wanted you guys to do this exercise so that you can share this exercise with others. Have her make the list, and say what does harm to your child look like if that's her number one thing, right? Let's just skip you. We're going to assume you're her number one thing, but have the conversation about the next one, her kids, right? What does, in her mind, when does it represent harm? And have her describe what harm to her children looks like. And that'll give you at least a keystone to start building from, a model of harm that she can accept and understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and so I just add on this here because a lot of us have a television in our home.
Yes.
And that television is an attack vector.
Yes.
Right. So that's kind of where the question was leading, is how to define the boundary of what you're actually being attacked, because you're actually inviting the attack, and then being conquered and captured and conquered in your home sometimes.
And we don't want to demoralize ourselves. We don't want to discourage ourselves, right? Either we are largely conquered. It sucks. We are largely conquered. We are living in the midst of our enemy's assertion of power over our institutions. So a lot of the stuff we have to do on a day-to-day basis, it's unavoidable that we're engaging against our own interests with our enemies. Right? So don't feel like we have to win this thing all at once either. We have to start taking steps to turn this back into war. Because right now we're not at war. It needs to be. It's a problem that we're not at war. I wish I didn't have to give this talk. We should be at war. We're not. We're not acting like we're at war. We're not behaving like we're at war. We're not spending like we're at war. We're not engaging with each other like we're at war. We're not standing on a war footing and contributing to a war effort. If we're at war, we would be. If you need to give them your money, be a pain in their ass. Demand all of their services match your needs and your requirements. Don't be a gentle, quiet customer. Be the loud, obnoxious, angry customer turning their business towards your aims.
But real quickly on that note, like I use the TV as a tool to teach my kids that they are under attack. Right.
Okay.
So I
don't get rid of that.
Okay. So that's the way I present it to them, so they think about what's
start to be aware.
Right. Yeah. Right. But and I'm thinking about the broader picture, but in my house, that's the way I
that's different.
Approach it. Yeah.
Well, and yesterday Michael gave us a bunch of tools for doing the same thing. We can use games to do all this stuff too, right? And we got to get we got to get more creative in our defense of us and ours than our enemy is getting creative in their attack of us and ours, right? And we're not going to have all those answers today, right? But we have to start pretending like we have to start acting like we're at war if we ever want it to be a war instead of this being trampled on. And we're this guy right now. We're the guy getting jumped, and we're thinking to ourselves, hey, we're at war. Everything's at war. It's a culture war. We're in a culture war. We're not at war. We need to be at war. Go ahead.
Well, and us cognitively masculine people, let's make sure this is on, yeah. Us cognitively masculine people are much more easy to convince that we're at war and need to take those measures. And this is why these activities are so important, is because to convince a cognitively feminine that we're also at war and what they need to do about it requires us to take them through that steps, because they will not intuit it.
Right.
One of the best ways to get women to act in their own self-defense and best interests, I find this as a coach, is to ask them what effect not taking care of themselves has on their children.
Right. Yes.
Because they are not very motivated for their own interests.
Right. Yeah, if your name isn't on your list of most important things, you got some problems. Just to that point, and just for the point of precision, I don't want to frame this as recognize we're at war, so take the steps. I want to frame this, and I'm really trying to frame this as take the steps so that we are at war. Right. Because right now we're not.
We're just taking a beating. Right?
Yeah, right now we're not at war. I wish I didn't have to say that. I don't like that I push back against that argument. I wish I could agree with you all and say, yeah, we're at war. We're not.
Yeah, can I answer this? Because this is a subject we and I've talked a lot. Is I simply look at capital destruction, right? So that's my job. I showed you the list of demonstrated interests. I like capital destruction. So, and I raise things to first principles. But, he was making the point, and he was driving home this idea that, yeah, well and good, but are we at war, or are they just kicking our asses, right? I mean, and so they've conquered those institutions by the intentional, planned, organized, financed, deliberate march through the institutions of cultural production, trying to destroy the entirety of our civilization, just like they've destroyed all those other great civilizations before and reduced them to homogenous, ignorant, superstitious backwardness and dysgenia. So do we want that to happen? Well, it's a great thing. It's boiling the frog, right? If you're sitting here and we're being boiled like the frog that doesn't realize it's time to jump out of the hot water. Right. Instead, and that's the virtue of what I'm going to say, slow conquest. Right. All right, a slow conquest is turning up the heat slowly through soft destruction of capital until the capital that's invisible is owned by them, and therefore the physical and genetic and institutional capital that was yours is now theirs.
And they don't ever want us to make this distinction. They don't want this in our awareness. They want us thinking we're at war right now, doing nothing.
I just wanted to reiterate, Noah had a previous comment that I feel is 100% correct, that the process needs to be absolutely reversed. And if I'm correct that the definition of neoliberalism is the process of liquidating culture, then the reverse of that would be to start capitalizing culture. And that would mean that we'd have to take liquid abilities and start putting them in the capitalizing culture.
One of the things that I really liked about your presentation was, going to war or engaging and avoiding the fight and watching for that. But that list, this isn't like going to the front lines 100% of the time. If you're an activist, right, go fight for medical freedom, go fight for parental rights, go find things that hit your home. If you don't have a project that you're passionate about, then look at what's important in your world and start there. So, if it's supporting people, if it's political, if it's parents' rights, whatever that version of that is, pick one, go boycott, go pay attention to where your money goes and start with those things and see what comes next from that if you don't have your...
Yeah. Go back to that list, and that list will probably come up again today or tomorrow, something like that, right? We may return to that in later talks, right? Go back to that list. That list needs to be defining what actions you're taking to engage in this war. If it's not defining those things, your list is wrong. You need to come up with what actually is important to you. Because that list should be defining how you're engaging in this war. Because that's what you're gonna fight hardest to protect. That's what you're gonna fight hardest to make sure is not paying the cost of you being conquered. So if that list isn't defining how you're engaging in this conflict, Make that list again and keep making it until it is defining how you're engaging in this conflict.
Yeah, one other thing I was going to mention with the social institutions would be that since they are corrupt and falling apart, they're no longer serving the social function they were set up for. So part of them conquering them is they don't know how to use them. They don't know how to make them function the way they're supposed to. So you can gain a lot of wind in your sails building your own instruments by going to the people who aren't being served by the current institutions and actually solving those problems for them, actually providing them the supply for their demand.
Yeah.
So.
Well, my business is called Core Human Competence. I absolutely believe competence is one of the vectors of attack. That's why I created that business, was to address that specific vector. So, but just for for our house, Malia, my wife, she's the one that was asking that last question, right? Our house is at war. We behave like we're at war. I don't want my kids to be in that state, but that's where we are. I want them to be conquered less than I want them to be at war. I pick war over being conquered. Right now, that's the choice I have. I don't have another choice available. So I pick war over being conquered. War, captured, or conquered are my choices right now. Those are the only choices available to any of us in this room right now. Pick which one you want and start doing something about it. Let's go to war. That's all I got.